The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. In his novel, This Is Happiness, Niall Williams remembers when electricity and light came to their little Irish village of Faha. This is what he says. I'm aware here that it may be hard to imagine the enormity of this moment. The threshold that once crossed would leave behind a world that had endured for centuries, and that this moment was only 60 years ago. So consider this. When the electricity did finally come, it was discovered that the 100-watt bulb was too bright for Faha. The instant garishness was too shocking. Dust and cobwebs were discovered to have been thickening on every surface since the 16th century. Reality was appalling. It turned out Siny Dune's fine head of hair was a wig, not even close in color to the scruff of his neck. And Marion McGlynn's healthy allure was in fact a caked makeup the color of red turf ash. In the week following the switch on, store owner Tom Clohessy couldn't keep mirrors in stock as people came in from out the country and bought looking glasses of all variety, went home and in merciless illumination endured the chastening of all flesh when they saw what they looked like for the first time. Some people don't like the light. It's too bright. It shines, as we're going to see here, it shines, and it's not always pretty what it reveals. But what I'd like to argue for today is that the only path to joy is through exposure, is the light shining brightly. So I want us to look at three things this morning from these two verses. Number one, the misunderstanding the light, or misunderstanding the light. Number two, coming face to face with the light. And number three, embracing the light. So misunderstanding the light, coming face to face with the light, embracing the light. So number one, misunderstanding the light. I've never been to Las Vegas. I don't know how many of you might have been there, but I've heard plenty of stories and I've seen plenty of pictures. It's full of glitz and glamour, and it's a place where people go to have fun. But there is a dark side. There is a dark side. So we could talk about the dark side of gambling and the dark side of organized crime, but that's not the dark side I want to talk about right this minute. There's another dark side. Above the glitz and glamour that is Las Vegas, there's a whole labyrinth of tunnels that is the sewer of Las Vegas. In his book, Beneath the Neon, Life and Death in the Tunnels of Las Vegas, journalist Matthew O'Brien got interested in the tunnels because a man who had committed a crime disappeared in the tunnels, and the police went in there. They don't go in there often, but they went in there to find him, and they caught him. And he saw it on the news, and he was fascinated by it. And so he decided to investigate it for himself. So he ventured into the tunnels to see what was down there, and he was dumbfounded. He actually found a whole city of residents who were generally homeless people, and they would forage for food. They would go up and find food, and they would beg during the day, but at night they would disappear down in the tunnels. And the police would not often follow them down there because of its danger and its general sense of lawlessness. So isn't that the way life is from a distance? Las Vegas looks like a glamorous city with neon lights, people having a good time, but right under the strip is a whole world of darkness where people live by their wits just to survive. Doesn't that describe the human race? We live in a world of facades where people hide who they truly are. Plato, the famous philosopher, said we can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light. And so people fear the light, they fear exposure. That's what people fear. So we'll come back to that point in point number 2. I want to talk about the darkness right now. Our passage this morning talks about light and darkness. Verse 2 says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them a light has shone. So it talks about those who walked in darkness and then those who were in a land or dwelt in a land of deep darkness. The two words meaning darkness here, it's the same word, darkness, but there are two different words in the Hebrew. The first one, which is hoshech, actually means darkness, but the second one, which is salmavet, is translated as death shadow or deep darkness, or as the King James Version calls it, the shadow of death. You know, in Psalm 23, where it says, when you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that's the word that's being used there. It's a lot deeper than just darkness. People have dwelt in this shadow of death. There was deep darkness over the land. So what does this mean? What did that mean? Well, it was that Israel had wandered far from God. Well, why had they wandered far from God? There were two big issues in their day. So let's take a look. Verse 3 puts it in a positive light, but we can gather what the issues were from these verses. So look at verse 3. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. So we'll talk about the joy in a minute, but take a look at the two issues here. Israel's joy rose and fell. It was rising and falling depending on these two issues. The harvest, which was their livelihood, and the second one was war, which had to do with their security. Nations were always invading other nations, and it was always a concern about your security. So first, they were deeply concerned for their harvest. This was an agrarian society. It rose and it fell on the rain and the crops. That was the issue that was on everyone's mind. They had to have rain or they would be destitute. And as they looked at the Philistines and other nations around them, they seemed to be doing very well. And those nations worship Baal. And he seemed to be sending rain to them. So it seemed that if they wanted to have rain and thus have crops, they would need to worship Baal. It wasn't that they were denying God. Of course, the God that had gotten them out of the wilderness wanderings, had gotten them out of Egypt, that God was very powerful. But somehow, he couldn't provide the rain they needed. So in addition to Yahweh, they needed to worship Baal as well. Brothers and sisters, in so many ways, we are no different than the Israelites. We don't deny God. We're here this morning to worship. We believe that God is sovereign and that he rules and he reigns. But when push comes to shove and the chips are down and we're facing a difficult problem in our lives, then certainly we pray about it, but our anxiety betrays us. Our anxiety betrays us. It tells us that we're not really trusting in God to provide for our needs, and we're not really trusting him to take care of whatever circumstance is making us anxious. And often, instead of believing what Psalm 131 says, look at what it says. Oh, Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. Do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me, but I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. Doesn't that just make you want to go to sleep? I love that. I quote that all the time, as you know. But instead of doing that or believing that, we take matters into our own hands and do everything we can to solve our own issues. And when no solution can be found, our anxiousness multiplies. What are you anxious about this morning? What issue is burning on your heart this morning? There is no other God but Yahweh. The second issue had to do with their external security. And I mentioned last week that Israel did not have natural boundaries which would make them secure. It was more rolling hills and plains. And on the face of it, they could have been overrun at any time. Any powerful army could march right through there. And so, as most countries did in those days, they were always making alliances with other powers to protect them and not invade them or whatever. But the bottom line is that they did not trust in God for their security. In Psalm 4, there's this wonderful verse at the end. It says, "In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." I wonder if we're getting it wrong. When you looked for the house that you live in, what were the factors that you were looking for? Was it a place that you could do really good incarnational ministry? Or you could reach out to your neighbors where God could use your gifts and all the other things about it were irrelevant? Or was the top thing on the list a secure neighborhood where there's very little crime? See, now I understand that part of parenting and everything is to keep your kids safe. And yet the verse says, "You alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." If you're like me, you struggle to put your trust in the Lord. So what about darkness? What about the darkness? Our tendency when we think about darkness in the world is to pinpoint things. We in the church tend to pinpoint things like sexual promiscuity or homosexuality or abortion or transgenderism. And truth be told, the Bible affirms that these are not things that will enable flourishing. It calls them sin. But I think that for most of us, the darkness takes a very, very different form. And it's not less dark. It's not less dark. It shows up as anxiety and self-reliance. When we don't get what we want or we can't control what we fear, we are anxious. And so many of us don't want anyone pinpointing these things or pointing out these things to us. It's much easier to think that the darkness is about those people out there, those that do evil things, than it is to think that there is much darkness in us. So number 2, coming face to face with the light. Stephen Kingsley wrote, "In our family carpet cleaning business, we offered a special rate for removing pet urine odors. So to show potential customers their need for the service, I would darken the room and then turn on a powerful black light. And the black light caused urine crystals to glow brightly. To the horror of the homeowner, every drop and dribble could be seen, not only on the carpet, but usually on the walls, drapes, furniture, and even on lampshades. One homeowner begged me to shut off the light. I can't bear to see anymore. I don't care what it costs. Please clean it up." That's marketing right there. Another woman said, "I'll never be comfortable in my home again." So the offense was there all the time, right? But it was invisible until the right light exposed it. When the lights come on, all kinds of things are exposed, and nobody wants that. Brothers and sisters, it's so easy for us to shine a light on our culture and say, those are the bad things. But when it comes to ourselves, we want that light dimmed as much as possible. Our passage this morning is talking about Jesus who comes as the light. But people didn't want that. Look at what it says in John 1. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. So why didn't they receive him? I was having lunch with a friend, and he said to me, "You don't believe in that original sin stuff, do you?" And I asked him, "Do you believe that everyone has a selfish streak?" And he didn't have to think too much about it. He agreed that, yeah, everybody has a selfish streak. And I held up my hands and shrugged, and I said, "That's original sin." Of course, original sin is much more pervasive than just a slight selfish streak. And so when the light invades the world, many people run because the light exposes selfishness, which is actually the root of all darkness, right? Pride and selfishness is the root of all darkness, and no one wants their darkness exposed. It's much easier to think about the people out there that are wandering in darkness. Why is that no one wants their darkness exposed? Well, it's because they don't see it. And when someone points it out, they don't think it's true. Dan Meyer, who's a pastor in Oak Brook, Illinois, said this: "When I was a teenager, I met a man who had this disturbing way of pointing things out that I found downright uncomfortable. In one discussion, John suggested that I didn't know as much about myself as I thought I did, and furthermore, I would probably never change. I hurled back that he was wrong. I understood myself pretty well. I was on top of things in most areas of my life. And who was he to tell me that I could never change if I wanted to? And then John said something that blew me apart and left me standing dazed and silent among the ruins of my self-perception. Dan," he said, "there are things about you that you can never change. The reason you can never change them is you can't see them. And the reason you can't see them is that you are using them to see." If I asked you right now to looked like, would you be able to tell me that? No, you wouldn't, because you can't see them. Why can't you see them? Because you're using them to see. It's the point. And that's why the light is necessary. It's the light that shows us who we are. But people are so afraid of it. They're sure that exposure that the light brings will destroy them. But it's a lie. It's a lie that has so many people shackled to their fear. People running from stuff that they don't want to see instead of turning and facing. And as Steve Brown used to always say, kissing the demon on the lips. Looking it full in the face. The coming of the light is actually the opposite of what people are running from. And people run from it consistently. But the coming of the light is actually the opposite. For those who embrace it, there's actually joy. There's actually joy. So number 3, embracing the light. See, the light that came into the world wasn't harsh. It didn't come to destroy. And it didn't expose everything and everyone all at once. The light didn't come as a conquering king. It actually came as a baby. Have you thought of that? The light that would shine into the depths of darkness came as a baby. That's what it tells us in verse 6, for to us a child is born. What they didn't understand was that this baby would endure the indignities of this life, the hardships of sickness, the difficulty of eking out a living and growing up poor. He would grow up and gather around him a motley crew that argued with each other about who was the greatest. He was kind to his people. But he would confront the darkness inherent in the religious rulers of his day. They'd made following after God an impossible task of rules and regulations. They didn't care about the heart. They didn't care about the struggles of the people. They only cared about themselves. And he saw that these religious leaders were not leading people to God. And so what did he do? Well, he looked at the people and he had compassion on them. He saw them as sheep without a shepherd. He healed their diseases and cast out their demons. He spoke kindly to them and loved them into his kingdom, all the while, exposing their darkness and confronting their darkness. But he did it with gentleness and with humility. It wasn't because he was undecided about what the darkness was. He knew that the only option for the people that he loved so much was that the darkness would have to be dealt with. And so he did it himself. He dealt with it himself. He went to a cross. Let's not think for a minute that he didn't understand the darkness in his kindness. That he didn't come to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. We're not thinking for a minute that he didn't understand the darkness. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he went through a dark night of the soul. And then on the cross, his Father abandoned him and he went to hell for us. Talk about darkness. So let's not think for a minute that he didn't understand the darkness, that he's not committed to exposing the darkness in us because he knows what it does to us. See, that is his supreme act of compassion. To expose the darkness in you and in me. And he goes to a cross so that we can be forgiven. A certain medieval monk announced he would be preaching the next Sunday evening on the love of God. And as the shadows fell and the light ceased to come in through the cathedral windows, the congregation gathered in the darkness of the altar, and the monk lighted a candle and carried it to the crucifix. And first of all, he illumined the crown of thorns, and next the two wounded hands, and then the marks of the spear wound. And in the hush that fell, he blew out the candle and left the chancel. There was nothing else to say. But actually there is. There was something else to say. Because the crucified Christ is not on a cross anymore, as he's depicted in so many places. He's not on a cross anymore. He rose again, and his disciples saw him, and they were completely transformed. Their mourning was turned to dancing. Their darkness was turned to light. What they thought was God's anger was turned to joy. That's why John wrote this, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Look at what our passage says about those who see the light. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. See, the two most important things for the Israelite was harvest and security. And Isaiah here compares the joy that the light brings to when there's bountiful harvest and when they have defeated their enemies and they're actually counting the spoil. So these are metaphors so that the people can understand joy. If they understood what joy was, that was joy to them. What does it take for you to understand what joy is? These are metaphors. See, I don't think that these metaphors hold a candle to the real joy that comes after we have been exposed. Because when we are exposed, he comes in with the soothing balm of the gospel and he heals. By his stripes, we have been healed. Oh, when the real light comes, we don't run from exposure. We face it. But then we turn to Jesus and we give it to him. He brings healing. He brings forgiveness. He brings beauty. He brings joy. And he begins to change us. He exposes our darkness. He heals us by shedding his warm, beautiful, loving, gracious light into our hearts. Is it painful? Absolutely. Is it worth it? Absolutely. You can't get the joy without pain. It's not possible. You can try to buy your joy. You can try to experience your joy by throwing money at it. You can do all those things, but there's only one way to joy. It's when we face who we are and we turn to him and we see him come in and change us. But he does it, and there's nothing more beautiful than to see him begin to release us from our darkness. So what is it that God does in people when the light shines? Listen to the words of the great theologian and pastor Jonathan Edwards from the 19th century. And he talks about what God does in a Christian. As he has more holy boldness, so he has less self-confidence. As he's more sure than others of deliverance from hell, so he has greater sense that he deserves it. He's less apt than others to be shaken in faith, but more apt than others to be moved by solemn warnings or God's frowns and the calamities of others. He has the firmest comfort, but the softest heart. Richer than others, but poorest of all in spirit. He's the tallest and strongest saint, but the least and tenderest child among them. This is what God works in his people. Do we see it? Who doesn't want that? It's a complete and total faith in the one who gave himself for us. It's a faith that he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? See, Jesus came to free us from ourselves. Why wouldn't we embrace that? That's the gospel. And the gospel changes everything. Let's pray.